The prairie stretched wide as an ocean, endless and quiet, yet never truly silent. The wind carried its own hymn across the tall, brittle grass, bending it like worshippers at prayer. And somewhere beyond that sea of fading gold, a rider returned home at dusk. His name was Eli Carter, a rancher with shoulders hardened by years of work and eyes that had learned not to dream. The horse's hooves fell heavy against the dirt road, their rhythm steady, but within Eli's chest another rhythm faltered. His heart stuttered in a way he had long since ignored. The sun sank lower, painting the world in amber light, as if the land itself wished to burn before surrendering to night. Eli did not notice the beauty. He rarely did anymore. Beauty was a fragile thing, and he had trained himself to live without it. What he could not train himself to forget, however, was the ritual that awaited him this night. The town of Willow Bend was not large, yet its roots ran deep, tangled with secrets older than memory. And among its secrets, none loomed larger than the harvest ritual. Some called it tradition, others called it curse. None dared call it by its true name, for to speak of it openly was said to summon misfortune. Every year, when the fields had given their last and the barns stood full, the townsfolk gathered by the great fire pit at the edge of town. A bonfire was raised, masks were carved, and names were whispered until one was chosen. That chosen soul would kneel before the crowd, masked and silent, as the leader of the ritual laid his hand upon them. It was said the ritual kept hunger at bay, that without it, the earth would grow stubborn and the sky would refuse its rains. Children believed it. Adults half believed it. But belief hardly mattered. The ritual had become law, and no law was dare break. This year, Eli Carter had been named to lead it. And this year, Clara Mayfield had been chosen to kneel. Clara's home stood at the edge of her father's old land, where fences leaned tiredly and the barn door groaned with each gust of wind. Since his passing, she had lived alone, tending to the cattle, fixing the roof, mending what she could with her own hands. People in town whispered about her, some out of pity, some with cruel suspicion. A woman living alone was a question without an answer, and people in Willow Bend did not like unanswered questions. Clara had heard their whispers all her life, that her family was marked, that her father had once faltered during the ritual, and though he had carried it out in the end, the pause had cursed their line. Misfortune had indeed followed, his sudden death, her mother's long illness, Clara's solitude. But Clara carried herself with a strength that unsettled those around her. She did not bend beneath their gossip. She did not break beneath their silence. She walked with her chin lifted and her eyes steady, though deep within she carried the same ache her father once did, the ache of being seen only through the mask others forced upon you. The night came sooner than she hoped. A great fire clawed toward the stars, its light licking the faces of those gathered round. Shadows danced across their cheeks, warping them into something less than human. Each person wore a mask, crude wood, carved by hand, painted in black ash and red clay. The masks were heavy, expressionless, and yet they seemed to carry the weight of countless years. Clara knelt before the flames, her knees pressing into the dirt. Her mask was different. Its hollow eyes widened too far, its mouth shaped into an unending silence. She could feel the grain of the wood biting into her skin, could taste the smoke seeping through its narrow cracks. She did not tremble, not outwardly. Inwardly, her chest was a storm. When Eli stepped forward, the murmurs ceased. He moved with the stiffness of a man walking into his own judgment. His mask, too, was carved, but his role did not require it. As leader, he stood barefaced before them all. A cruel irony, Clara thought, that the one who carried no mask was the one expected to keep others bound within theirs. The crowd's silence deepened. Eli's boots stopped before her. He looked down at her masked face, the firelight throwing strange shapes across his weathered features. He lifted his hand, ready to press it against her shoulder, the final gesture that would seal the ritual, as it always had. But he froze. The world seemed to still around him. The flames leaned higher, as if holding their breath. The crowd watched, waiting. And in that silence, Clara whispered, so soft it was nearly lost to the crackle of the fire. "Please take it off." Her voice carried not desperation, but something deeper. A plea born of years unspoken, of burdens never shared. Eli's hand hovered in the air. His throat tightened. For a moment, he thought he had misheard. But her words, quiet as they were, clung to him like smoke. "Please take it off." He saw her then, not the cursed daughter, not the chosen kneeler, but a woman bound by a ritual older than her own life. He saw her strength, her stillness, her defiance hidden beneath the mask. The weight of the crowd pressed on him. He could feel their expectation like a noose tightening. Break the ritual, and he would damn them all. Fulfill it, and he would damn himself. His breath came ragged. His hand shook. In the end, he let it fall, not to the mass, but to his side. The ritual remained unbroken. His hesitation lasted only a heartbeat, yet it burned like eternity. The people murmured. They saw his pause, though none dared name it. The fire roared higher, swallowing their unease. The ritual was done, at least to their eyes. But Eli knew the truth. He had not finished it. He had only delayed its death. Later that night, he rode home beneath a sky heavy with stars. The prairie stretched black and endless, the wind cold against his face. Yet all he felt was the echo of her voice. "Please take it off." The mask's hollow eyes haunted him. The way she had knelt, proud even in submission. The way her voice had not begged, but demanded to be seen. He reached his ranch, tied his horse, and walked inside. But the fire in his hearth gave him no warmth. His walls pressed in too close. The silence was unbearable. He poured himself whiskey, but it burned without comfort. When he finally laid down to sleep, his dreams betrayed him. He saw Clara's mask. He saw her eyes behind it, though he could not truly see them. He heard her voice over and over, until the words were etched into his very bones. "Please take it off." In the morning, the town would go on as if nothing had happened. The ritual had been performed. The harvest would be safe. The people would work, laugh, gossip, and forget. But Eli would not forget. And Clara could not. For something had shifted, subtle as a shadow moving at the edge of sight. A thread had been pulled. A crack had formed. And though no one else could see it, both of them knew. The ritual was not over. Not yet. The morning after the ritual rose quiet and pale. Mist clung to the ground, weaving through the fence posts like ghosts reluctant to leave. Clara stood at her doorway, arms folded, eyes fixed on the fading fire pit far in the distance. Even from here, she thought she could smell the smoke, feel the weight of the mask still pressing into her skin. Her father's voice returned to her then, soft and worn like an old hymn. He had once told her that masks were not made of wood alone, that some were invisible, carved of silence, carried every day until they became part of the face beneath. He had worn his mask well, though she remembered the crack in it. The night he had hesitated before the crowd, just for a breath, just for a heartbeat, the way his hand faltered before completing the ritual. And though he had gone on with it, though he had not dared break it fully, the town had never forgiven. Whispers followed him until his last day. When he died, the whispers slid to her like water running downhill, inevitable and cold. Now Clara bore them alone. The rancher, Eli Carter, carried his own ghosts. He sat in his kitchen that morning, staring into a cup of black coffee gone cold. The light cut across his face in hard lines, making the shadows deeper, his features more weary. He was a man respected by the town. They admired his cattle, his steady hand, his ability to provide. Yet behind his reputation, emptiness lived. There was a time when he had known warmth. Once, long ago, a woman had tried to love him. She had waited, patient as spring rain, for him to open. But Eli had learned early that to let someone too close was to hand them a weapon. So he pushed her away, gently at first, then cruelly. By the time he realized what he had lost, she was gone, her absence leaving a silence heavier than her presence ever had. Since then, he kept his heart locked tight, feeding it only the dry bread of work and habit. He thought himself strong for doing so. But as Clara's words echoed in him, as he remembered her masked face turned upward, He began to wonder if strength and cowardice wore the same skin. Clara went about her chores with steady hands, though her mind wandered. She fetched water from the well, scattered feed for the hens, mended a torn fence with wire. Each task was something her father had taught her, each movement pulling memories from her bones. It was then she heard the steady ring of iron striking iron, a sound out of place here on the edge of her land. She followed it and found a man working by the roadside. Daniel Reeves. He was not from Willow Bend. He had come months earlier, a blacksmith who set up near the town's livery. Most knew little of him, for he kept his voice low and his dealings simple. But Clara had noticed him in passing, the way he worked with patience, the way he looked at the world as though listening to it. Now he stood before her, sleeves rolled, sweat darkening his shirt. He was fixing the wheel of an old wagon that had slipped from its axle. His hands were steady, deliberate, his movements calm, as though nothing in the world could hurry him. Clara cleared her throat, her voice carrying softly. "You've been out a while." He looked up, eyes the color of river stone. He nodded once, a small smile hidden in his beard. "Stubborn wheel, but it'll mend." There was no judgment in his tone, no curiosity sharp enough to wound. Only simple fact. Clara lingered, watching as he worked. She had grown used to men who either looked past her or stared too hard. Daniel did neither. He saw her, yet did not press upon her with his seeing. When he finished, he set the wheel firm and stepped back. The wagon stood whole again. He wiped his hands on a rag and spoke, not boastful, not proud. "Things break. Best we fix them before they fail us worse." Clara felt a quiet stir in her chest. A truth so simple, spoken without weight, yet it carried more comfort than she had expected. In the evenings that followed, she saw him more often, sometimes at the well, sometimes passing her land, sometimes at his forge in town where sparks flew like fireflies against the night. He spoke little, but when he did, his words landed like seeds, small but with the power to grow. One evening, she walked past his smithy and paused. He was working on a plowshare, the glow of the forge painting his face in amber. He noticed her, nodded, and without a word set a small bucket of water by her feet. She had not asked. He had simply known she had walked far and would be thirsty. Such gestures seemed nothing to others. To Clara, they were everything. Meanwhile, Eli carried his burden heavier each day. He worked his land, but could not escape the memory of that night. The pause, the whisper, the mask. He drank more than he wished to admit, though it never drowned the sound of her voice. Sometimes, when the sky grew bruised with twilight, he rode past her land without reason. He did not approach. He only watched from a distance, saw her moving among the cattle, her hair catching the last light, her figure steady as the earth itself. He envied her resilience, though he knew she paid dearly for it. He wanted to speak, to apologize, to ask what she had meant. But each time, silence claimed him. Eli Carter, who could command men and beasts alike, found himself powerless before a single woman's courage. Clara, too, felt the weight pressing. The whispers in town grew louder, that the ritual had not been performed cleanly, that the rancher had faltered, that Clara's presence was to blame. She walked through the general store with eyes upon her, though none dared meet her gaze directly. Children whispered behind their hands. Old women muttered prayers. That night, alone in her small house, Clara stood before the mirror. She lifted the mask from where she had hidden it in a chest. Its hollow eyes stared back at her. She pressed it against her face once more, and the old ache returned. The mask did not hide her. It swallowed her whole. Tears rose, though she rarely allowed them. Not for the town, not for their whispers, but for the simple truth that she longed to be seen. Truly seen. Not as cursed, not as chosen, simply as Clara. It was Daniel who broke her solitude. One day, as she struggled to mend her wagon wheel, her hands raw from forcing the iron band back into place, he appeared. He did not ask permission. He only set down his tools and worked beside her. For a long while, they said nothing. Only the sound of wood groaning, iron clanging, sweat falling to the dirt. When at last the wheel slipped firm into place, Clara leaned against the wagon, breathless. Daniel wiped his brow and spoke, voice low. "People carry rituals like shackles. They forget they can be broken. Clara looked at him, startled. He had said nothing of the harvest before. She had never spoken of it to him. He met her gaze, steady and unafraid. Shackles only stay until someone dares lift the key. Clara's heart stirred, a trembling she had not felt in years. That night, as the prairie lay dark and the crickets sang their endless song, Clara lay awake. She thought of Eli, haunted by silence. She thought of Daniel, who saw through silence. And she thought of the mask, hidden in her chest, waiting for her return. The town whispered louder now, that the ritual would come again sooner, harsher, demanding more. That Clara's name had not yet been washed away. That Eli's paws had cursed them all anew. Clara knew then that she would not escape. The ritual would rise again. The fire would burn again. The mask would call her name. But for the first time, she felt the ember of choice flicker within her. For the first time, she felt she might not kneel. The storm was gathering, though not yet overhead. Clara heard its distant growl in the whispers of the people, in the silence of Eli, in the steady truth of Daniel. The mask waited, the fire waited, and deep within, Clara's heart whispered back. Not this time. The days that followed wore a strange quiet. Not the gentle kind that soothes, but the heavy kind that settles like ash after a fire. The town went about its work, but their glances lingered too long. The market hummed with trade, but voices hushed when Clara passed. Something unspoken pressed upon Willow Bend, and all could feel it. Clara walked through those days as though carrying a secret flame cupped in her palms, fragile, flickering, yet refusing to die. She had spoken little to Daniel since that day by the wagon, yet his words lingered in her chest. Shackles, keys, the courage to lift what others had long accepted. That evening she found herself walking again past his forge. The glow of the fire bled into the night, painting the air in warm hues. Daniel stood at his anvil, each strike of hammer against iron ringing like a heartbeat. Sparks leapt, brief and beautiful, before vanishing into the dark. She lingered in the doorway. He looked up, met her gaze without surprise, as though he had expected her. He set the hammer down and wiped his brow. "You've been walking far," he said softly. "Sit, rest." She did. The wooden stool creaked beneath her as she lowered herself, the warmth of the forge wrapping around her like a blanket. For a long while, neither spoke. The silence between them was not the brittle silence of strangers, but the deep silence of two who knew words were not always needed. At last she said, "Do you believe it? The ritual?" Daniel studied the iron cooling on the anvil. His hands brushed it gently, as if it were alive. "I believe people give power to what they fear. And once fear has enough power, it becomes its own master." She looked down at her hands, scarred from years of work, from carrying burdens too heavy for one woman. And what if breaking it brings ruin? His eyes lifted, calm, unwavering. Then let ruin come. Better an honest ruin than a false salvation. The words sank into her. They frightened her, yet they freed her. For so long, she had carried the weight of others' belief. To hear someone speak of ruin as something less terrifying than silence, it struck her like a bell ringing truth. Eli, meanwhile, wrestled alone. He walked his land with restless steps, yet each fence mended, each steer guided, only deepened the hollowness inside. His pause at the ritual had not gone unnoticed. He could see it in the way men nodded more stiffly, the way women whispered more urgently. Respect had grown teeth, ready to bite should he falter again. But the voice haunted him. That plea, that whisper, "Please take it off." He had built his life on avoiding moments like that, moments that asked him to see too deeply, to feel too much. He had turned away from love once because it demanded his whole heart, and he had not been brave enough to give it. Now here was Clara, her eyes unseen, yet piercing him all the same, demanding a courage he did not possess. One evening, unable to bear it, he rode toward her land. He stopped at the edge of her fence line, the dusk casting shadows long across the grass. He watched her moving among the cattle, calm and steady, as if she were part of the earth itself. He wanted to call out, to cross the fence, to speak. But the words caught in his throat. She turned once, as though sensing him. Their eyes met across the distance. He froze. She did not call him forward, and he did not move. When at last he rode away, the silence between them was louder than any words could have been. The town's whispers grew darker. They said the ritual had not been clean, that Eli's hesitation had left the harvest at risk, that Clara's bloodline had cursed the town again. At the saloon, men drank and muttered. At the church, women prayed longer, their voices strained. Rumors spread that the ritual would need to be performed again, stronger this time, harsher, to undo what had been undone. Clara's name was always at the center. She heard it in the marketplace, in the hush of voices that died when she passed. She heard it in the clatter of hooves on the street, in the sharp glance of the preacher's wife. She heard it most in her own heart, the drumbeat of dread growing louder with each day. Yet alongside that dread came another sound, softer, steadier. Daniel's voice. Shackles. Keys. She began to believe that perhaps she was not doomed to kneel forever. One night, as storm clouds gathered heavy on the horizon, Clara found herself walking with Daniel beyond the edge of town. The prairie grass bent low in the wind, lightning flashing faint and far away. "Do you not fear them?" she asked. "Fear who?" "The town. Their judgment." Daniel's gaze remained on the horizon. A man who fears whispers will never hear the truth. She stopped walking, her hand brushing the tall grass. "You speak as if you've lived with chains yourself." He turned to her then, his eyes catching the flicker of lightning. "I have, and I broke them. That's why I know it can be done." Her throat tightened. She wanted to ask what chains, what story lived behind his quiet voice, but she did not. For the first time in her life, she felt the safety of not needing to know. The storm rolled closer, the air thick with the scent of rain. And in that heavy air, she felt something bloom. Not sudden, not fierce, but slow and steady, like the roots of a tree sinking deeper into soil. Meanwhile, Eli's own storm raged. He drank more. His hands shook when no one was looking. He dreamed of fire and masks, of Clara's voice echoing endlessly. He began to wonder if he, too, had lived his whole life behind a mask of work, of silence, of hardened skin. For the first time, he felt the hollowness split open, and what poured out was not strength, but fear. Fear that he had wasted his life. Fear that when the time came again, he would not be able to stand. The days shortened, the air turned sharp, and the storm everyone dreaded broke across the town. The council called it. The ritual would be repeated. A cleansing, they called it, to restore what Eli had spoiled. The fire would be lit again, the masks worn again, Clara's name chosen again. She heard it as she stood in the market, a loaf of bread in her hands. The words carried like thunder. That night, she sat alone in her home, the mask before her. She touched its hollow eyes, its silent mouth. She felt her father's ghost, her mother's sorrow, her own years of kneeling. And then she stood. She lifted the mask, not to wear but to hold. She pressed it to her chest like a burden she would no longer bear. Her heart beat steady. For the first time, she felt the ember of defiance blaze. The night of the ritual came. The storm broke with it. Lightning split the sky. Thunder shook the earth. The townsfolk gathered, their faces lit by firelight and fear. The masks looked more monstrous than ever in the storm's glow. Clara stepped forward, but she did not kneel. She held the mask in her hand, not on her face. Her eyes, uncovered, met the fire. Gasps rippled through the crowd. Murmurs rose like a tide. Eli stood before her again, his heart pounding like the storm. And Clara's voice cut through the thunder, steady and clear. "No ritual can tell me who I am." The fire roared. The storm raged. The town stood frozen. And for the first time in generations, the ritual cracked. The storm was merciless. Wind howled through the gathering, ripping cloaks and bending torches until their flames sputtered. Rain hissed against the bonfire, but the fire fought back, leaping higher, spitting sparks into the night. The people of Willow Bend stood packed tight, their masks shining wet, their eyes wide with fear. And in the center stood Clara Mayfield, unmasked. The mask dangled from her hand, a dead thing now, its hollow eyes staring down at the dirt. Her hair whipped in the wind, her face pale but steady. She had lived her whole life bent beneath whispers, bowed beneath the weight of stories not her own. Tonight, she stood straight. Tonight, she would not kneel. The murmurs grew into shouts. Put on. She defies the ritual. She'll bring ruin. Clara's voice rose above them, steady as stone. No ritual can tell me who I am. Her words cut through the storm like lightning. The crowd faltered. No one had spoken against it in living memory. No one had dared. Eli Carter stood frozen, his heart pounding against his ribs. He had led this ritual year after year, empty in his role, careful never to falter again. But tonight the storm inside him matched the storm outside. He saw Clara's face, open and bare, and something inside him cracked. He remembered her whisper, "Please take it off." He remembered the years he had worn his own invisible mask, the years he had chosen silence over truth, fear over love. He thought of the woman he had once lost, and how he had buried himself afterward in duty and drought. The crowd roared, demanding order, demanding the ritual, demanding Clara kneel. Eli stepped forward. His boots sank in the wet dirt. His hand shook. For the first time in his life, he did not hide it. He looked at Clara, rain dripping from his brow, firelight trembling across his face. She met his gaze with a steadiness that shamed him and saved him all at once. And then, slowly, deliberately, Eli lifted his own mask, the ceremonial mask of the ritual leader, and tore it from his face. The crowd gasped. Children clutched their mothers. The preacher crossed himself in horror. Eli held the mask in both hands, staring down at it. For years he had been the enforcer, the keeper of their fear. Now he felt its weight, its emptiness, its lie. He dropped it into the mud. The crack of it echoed louder than thunder. The ritual was broken. The people did not know whether to flee or fight. The preacher shouted curses. The councilmen demanded silence. But the storm roared louder, drowning them all. Clara stood still, unflinching. Eli stood beside her now, trembling but resolute. And then Daniel Reeves stepped quietly from the crowd. He had not worn a mask. He never had. He walked to Clara without hurry, without fear. His presence was not fire, not storm, but steady earth beneath her feet. He did not take her hand. He did not claim her. He only stood at her side, his eyes meeting hers with the simple truth he had always carried. I see you. The three of them stood before the fire, the cursed woman, the faltering rancher, the quiet blacksmith. And the town saw what they had never dared see. That power lived not in the ritual, but in the people who obeyed it. The preacher tried to shout over the storm. You'll damn us all. Clara's voice answered, calm but unshakable. We were damned the moment we believed fear was holy. Her words struck the people harder than any lightning. Some dropped their masks. Others clutched them tighter. Fear is a stubborn chain, but that night, links began to break. The storm broke near dawn. Rain softened. The wind fell quiet. The fire burned down to embers. The town stood scattered, dazed, unsure what had happened. Some left their masks in the mud. Others carried them home, still clinging to their power. But all knew something had shifted. The ritual was dead. Clara stood in the pale light of morning, her face bare, her body weary but unbowed. She felt as though 100 years had fallen from her shoulders. She did not know what the harvest would bring, whether ruin or plenty. She only knew that whatever came, it would be faced honestly, not hidden behind hollow wood. Eli approached her slowly. His face looked older, worn raw by the night. He opened his mouth, then closed it. At last, in a voice hoarse but true, he said, I was a coward, all my life, but not tonight, not because of you. She met his gaze. For the first time, she saw him without his silence, without his armor. A man, flawed and trembling, yet finally honest. She nodded once. That was enough. Daniel came to her after. He did not speak of bravery or ruin, did not praise her or claim her. He only handed her a cup of water, as he had before, and stood beside her as the sun rose. That simple act, quiet as dawn, rooted itself deeper in her than any fire or thunder could. She understood then that love need not roar. Sometimes it whispered, sometimes it simply stayed. The town would speak of that night for generations. Some would call it blasphemy. Others would call it freedom. Children would ask why masks lay buried at the edge of the field, half-rotted, never worn again. But those who were there would remember the truth. That one woman had stood, unmasked, and the world had shifted. Years later, when Clara walked through Willow Bend, she carried no burden but her own. Daniel walked often beside her, steady as always. Eli remained in the town too, quieter than before, but strangely lighter. He never led another ritual. He never wore another mask. He worked his land until his hands failed him. And when he died, people spoke not of the ritual he upheld, but of the one he broke. Clara, though, lived on, not as cursed, not as chosen, simply as Clara. And that was enough. And so, friends, the tale of Willow Bend became not one of masks and rituals, but of courage and truth. It became a story passed by firesides, whispered by mothers to daughters, told by old men who remembered the night the storm tore the sky and the masks fell into the mud. It is a simple truth, yet one we forget too often. The bravest act is not to fight the storm, but to lay down the mask we never chose to wear. For when we are seen as we are, without disguise, without fear, that is when we are free. If Clara's courage touched you, if you too have carried masks that were never truly yours, then this story belongs to you as well. Tell me, friends, from where are you listening tonight? Share your thoughts below. Like and subscribe if the tale stirred something in your heart. For stories live only when we pass them on, and tonight this one is yours.